It's the last chapter. Here we go. So, we've been studying the history of theater and how society has had its effect on theater and how theater's had its effect on society. Um, Meeting people where they're at, taking them away from themselves, helping them become closer to who they truly are. It's been quite the journey, and we're going to look now at kind of where we are now and some look at different cultures of theater. Okay, so political issues. I mean, I say recently, so we're in 22, so it's 5 years ago. But in 2017, there was a production of Julius Caesar done for Shakespeare in the Park, which is a festival done every single year. Julius Caesar, of course, has to die. We know that historically, and that is part of the show in even in Shakespeare's telling of it. So they decided to dress up Julius Caesar so that he very closely resembled Donald Trump. This meant that some people pulled funding. It caused a lot of upheaval, but that is what art does. That's what it's kind of supposed to do. It's supposed to reflect society. It's supposed to start discussions, maybe prompt action. So that's just a really recent example of how things can get really heated around theater. Um, we need to give some homage here to African American theater, of course. So actually, in the 1820s, husbands and wives tried to put together a theater with black actors doing plays that African American people could relate to, and they were somewhat successful. But of course, white supremacy coming in there made it unlivable and unsafe, so they couldn't do that. And really, if you were, a person of color, you were limited to being a maid, a servant, something domestic. You wouldn't get the big roles. It just, no matter how gifted and talented you were, there wasn't a demand for it that paid. So, and then that gets us into the minstrels. This was, you might have heard of the term blackface. White people painting their faces black for the purposes of entertainment. I mean, it's good to note that black performers got in there and would do the reverse, paint their face white. I mean, that's what else can you do? And they also found that companies who did minstrel shows wanted to appeal to all audiences, and so they would have a troupe of white and a troupe of black, and depending on the demographic they were playing to. There's an example here of Judy Garland in Babes on Broadway, a little clip there kind of giving an example of this. A lot of these movies are still available in platforms, Disney Plus. Anytime they have like a movie that has some of this racist content in it or could be offensive, I like their disclaimer that says this happened rather than pretend it didn't. We're putting it here so we know we never want to do this sort of thing again. That's how we move forward. So you can still find and see a lot of this content out there, lest we forget and history repeat itself. So moving forward into the 1900s, we start seeing musical theater produced by African Americans, which is wonderful. It's growing, it's getting popular, which is fantastic. Langston Hughes, definitely a person to note. A recognition for his work. And then there was the giant step in the 50s and A Raisin in the Sun, and these appealed to both black and white people, and so really popular, starting to see people come together. There's a real explosion in the 1950s as far as this culture and these kinds of performances go for African Americans and getting their stories out there. It's very exciting. You see a great list here. There's some wonderful links to some things that you can take a look at. Porgy and Bess here at the bottom, just beautiful. Down here is a great link to the Tony Awards. So that's, and you'll note some of these that you recognize. Dreamgirls you've probably heard of. I hope so. If you haven't, you should definitely check it out. It's a movie. Very could be one of your critiques. So very, still got a long way to go, but progress is being made. Okay, Asian American theater. I wish there was more of this. I really do. We've got a long way to go here, but there have been some well-known. There was a alliance was a musical that came out, had some good tracking. M Butterfly, now Aida, Flower Drum Song. Those might be a little bit more familiar to you, but we do. I feel like need to see more Asian American influence in our theater, and I hope that there's support and backing that's to come on that. Hispanic theater, so excited. So Our Lady of the Tortilla was actually just done over at Aurora Theater here in Corpus Christi. It was done this past fall. The playwright herself came to Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, gave a lecture last fall. So exciting that we were able to host her. And of course, Lin-Manuel Miranda, can you even look around and not hear about him right now? Because of course he created Hamilton, and before that did In the Heights. In the Heights is playing at Harbor Playhouse this summer. I don't think it opens until July, which is past when this course is done. But if you have a chance, you should go check it out. I know the director. Several of the students from here at the university are involved. Definitely worth going and having a nice night out and seeing some great dancing, great music. LGBT theater. Okay, so homosexuality is, I mean, it's always existed, and since theater, shows life, you would have those characters in place, sure, in the past, but they were always stereotypical, not at all well represented, as almost as offensive as blackface, not done well at all. In the 1950s, we started to see Tennessee Williams, and Edward Albee refer to homosexuality, but it really wasn't until Boys in the Band came out that you started to see that these are real people with many dimensions and layers. But then in the 1980s, of course, when the AIDS pandemic hit and there was very little reaction from the government on helping with this disease, with research and treatment, fight or fight. It was fight time. So we had to get the message out there. Angels in America shows how this has influences on the gay community as well as heterosexual and everything in between. So these are some great notes. Again, we got a long way to go here, but exciting about what's happened before and what's to come. Okay, American musical theater. We talked about the ballad opera, right? This is the operas of the past that told story with music. That was probably the beginning of the musical, but musical is an American term. It's very popular in the West End in London, yes, but it is something that it is considered America's greatest contribution to the theater. It really is. And it started really with, you had vaudeville, melodramas, burlesque. They used music, and it really did motivate the story. But in 1866 was when we saw the first real book form of a musical. And then from there, probably the most noted are Gilbert and Sullivan. Pirates of the Penzance is probably the most popular. If you've never heard I'm a Very Model of a Modern Major General, it is a triumph for any performer that can pull it off. The link here is to a very dated version of it. I'm sure you can find something a little bit more modern, but it is impressive. If anybody can manage to pull off all of those lyrics, it's very impressive. And funny. It's a funny show, and you don't think Pirates of Penzance, it's an opera. It's hilarious. Lots of good comedy that still stands today. Okay, from the 1900s to 1940s, I'd be very impressed if you recognize these, like Annie Get Your Gun. Songs like, and I'm sorry for my singing, but Give My Regards to Broadway. Like, if you know these, songs, I'd be very impressed. I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. Like, I recognize these because I have a very classic education, but these are older. My daughter was actually in Showboat. These are great shows, but people don't pay to see them as much anymore, so we just don't see them produced like we used to. High points were coming, like Oklahoma. You've probably heard of Oklahoma. I'm sure everybody has that grandma or that aunt or somebody that made you watch Sound of Music. But this was the big surge. That's when we really got to okay, we're making money. Now we're making serious money. These are lots of, the reason that you have probably seen a lot of these is they've been made into movies. It's much more accessible. That's why, don't get me started on why film is replacing it's not replacing theater, but it makes things so much more accessible. And then it's not lost. You do a performance, it's gone. Film, it can be there forever. West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof, Guys and Dolls, great classics. I'm sure you've at some point had to watch those, and you either fell in love with it and you end up growing up like me and doing it for the rest of your life, or maybe it's not your cup of tea, or maybe you just like it recreationally. I hope so. Okay, sorry. American musicals after 1965. Okay, so and again, you're gonna recognize Grease. I mean, very popular movie. Les Mis, if you've never, please do that at some point. Lion King, of course, you're gonna recognize. Avenue Q, hilarious. They're planning to do that at Harbor Playhouse in the next year. It's puppets, but you guys, it's adult humor puppets. So very, very funny. And then you can kind of see the date of this text here when it says coming up in the future, Moulin Rouge. It's done. It's out there. Frozen, definitely out there. Mean Girls, my kids know the entire soundtrack. The Princess Bride, that one is still in the works. That kind of was started gaining some tracking in 2020, and then we all know what happened then. So it's been kind of pushed aside. I'm interested to see if that one still comes about. Okay, contemporary theater. It's evolving, right? It's moved with society. It's helped reflect society, help us look within, help us look without, and helped us just to understand ourselves and our world a little bit better. And as we move forward, we're going to continue to see. I can't imagine how more outside the box we can get, but that's me, limited by my imagination. There are artists out there that can continue to push limits and boundaries that will continue to shock, inspire, and awe us. But when you are going to see these plays and hopefully exposing yourself, remember those three basic questions to ask. What is the artist trying to do? Were they successful in doing it? And was it worth doing? And that last one is a hard one, especially if you put your heart and soul into something. Was it worth it? So, guys, thanks for sticking with me. You've got your final critique due and the final exam. Hopefully, you finished this before that. And I hope that you've enjoyed the journey and that you've learned a little bit about our world and a little bit about your thoughts and opinions and your place in it, because that's what theater is supposed to do.